I overheard my parents whispering about arranging a dramatic reappearance for my long-lost sister to force us all back together. When I confronted them, they accused me of being self-centered and insisted this was about something far more important than my feelings, so I immediately revoked their invitations to my wedding. For years, I, 29 female, had believed my parents were truly thrilled about my upcoming wedding. After all, I was the only daughter they had left who still maintained contact with them. My older sister, 32 female, had vanished from our lives completely several years earlier, severing every tie after doing something to them they refused to explain properly. They always shut down any questions, and eventually I stopped trying. So when they dove headfirst into helping with my wedding, I took it as them finally wanting to cherish the daughter who stayed. My fiancé Brendan, 32 male, and I had always envisioned something quiet and personal, yet my parents insisted on overseeing everything, the invitations, the seating arrangements, even parts of the actual ceremony. At first it warmed my heart. They claimed they simply wanted to feel needed, and I didn't see the harm in letting them contribute. But as time passed, red flags started appearing. My suggestions were constantly dismissed. I'd mention a piece of music I loved for the processional, and Mom would brush it off saying she already had something more meaningful lined up. I repeated that we wanted to keep numbers low, but Dad kept dropping hints about how weddings were perfect occasions for mending family bonds. Then came the secrecy. Phone calls that suddenly dropped to whispers the moment I entered the room, conversations that stopped mid-sentence. I caught fragments about guests I didn't recognize ever being invited. When I asked, they'd wave it away. Just a few extra family members, honey. Nothing to worry about. The breaking point arrived the night I stopped by their house without warning to return some documents they'd left at mine. They didn't hear the door, and before I announced myself, I heard Mom in the kitchen, practically bubbling with glee. She was telling Dad she couldn't wait to see my expression when my sister walked in as the big surprise. That it would steal the entire evening, the moment everyone would remember forever. Dad chuckled and said he'd already rallied a few relatives who were completely on board. It was the ideal way to heal the family, and even if I was stunned at first, I'd come around because what bride wouldn't want her big sister back? My stomach plummeted. All these months, they hadn't been organizing my wedding out of joy for me. They'd been turning it into a stage-managed ambush for their own reconciliation fantasy. I slipped out unnoticed and drove home in shock. The betrayal burned. The day that was meant to celebrate Brendan and me had been hijacked to serve their agenda. I didn't even know which emotion to land on, rage, grief, both. I'd spent months believing their enthusiasm was love, only to discover I was merely the bait. Brendan saw the second I walked in that something was terribly wrong. I spilled everything through trembling words. He listened, face hardening with every detail. When I finished, he didn't waver. This was our wedding, and if my parents couldn't respect that, we were taking it back immediately. That night, I barely slept, replaying every dismissive comment, every hushed phone call, every time they'd preached, family above all. It had never been about me. Mom's giddy voice looped in my head. How perfect my sister's entrance would be, how everyone would talk about it for years. As if my marriage was just scenery for their fairy tale ending while my own wishes were irrelevant. By morning I knew what I had to do. I phoned them and said I needed to come over. Mom sounded delighted, probably expecting final dress photos or floral decisions. Dad said great because they had a couple of last-minute ideas to run by me. The nerve almost made me laugh. They still thought they held the reins. I arrived, skipped the small talk and laid it all out. I told them exactly what I'd overheard. Mom's excitement, Dad's smug certainty that I'd get over it. The relatives they'd already looped, and so my sister's return would be the night's centerpiece. They tried the innocent act at first, but I repeated their words verbatim until the pretense cracked. Mom's face cycled from fake bewilderment to barely concealed shame. Dad folded his arms, instantly defensive. Mom spoke first, claiming she couldn't understand why I was so angry. Couldn't I see this was about healing our family? My wedding was the perfect catalyst to bring my sister home. She'd dreamed of this for years, and of course they were happy for me, but some things were bigger than one person's day. Dad piled on, saying sacrifices were sometimes necessary for the greater good. and I was acting selfishly by denying the family this chance just to have everything my way. I asked if they'd ever once considered my feelings, if my happiness even registered. My wedding wasn't their reunion party or some reality TV moment. It was about Brendan and me. Mom sighed like I was the exhausting one and said she'd assumed the joy of seeing my sister again would erase any initial shock. That was when the depth of their delusion hit me. They weren't remorseful. They couldn't even grasp the betrayal. I stood up, shaking, and told them I was finished. Mom's eyes flew wide. Dad scowled like he was only just realizing I meant it. I said since they clearly valued their scheme over my well-being, they were no longer welcome at my wedding. They could stage their reunion somewhere else. Mom gasped that I couldn't possibly be serious. Dad called me dramatic. I repeated that my decision was final. Mom's voice climbed, frantic now, insisting I'd regret tearing the family apart over something so trivial. She warned that if I followed through, I'd be exactly like my sister, abandoning my parents without a backward glance. The comparison stung, but I didn't fold. I told them that unlike my sister, I had given them chance after chance to respect me. I trusted them, opened my life to them, believed their involvement came from love. They'd weaponized that trust. Now they could live with the fallout. I headed for the door. Mom made one last desperate plea, voice cracking, that all she wanted was her girls together again, that everything she'd done was out of love. I paused, looked back at the two people who raised me, people I'd spent my whole life trying to make proud, and saw them clearly for the first time. Parents who would always prioritize their own vision over my happiness. I told them if they truly loved me, they would never have orchestrated this to begin with. Then I left. That evening I recounted everything to Brendan. He said without hesitation that we were building the wedding we actually wanted, without them. We immediately began scrapping every trace of their involvement and starting fresh. If they wanted their big reunion so badly, they could fund and host it themselves. I'd spent months thinking I was planning my wedding. Now, at last, I really was. Update 1 to 15 days later. The quiet didn't last. I knew my parents wouldn't accept being excluded without a battle, but I underestimated their persistence. The very next morning, Mom began blowing up my phone. When I ignored the calls, she switched to novella-length texts about how I was overly emotional and needed to calm down before I destroyed everything. Dad's messages were icy. I was petty, childish, punishing them for trying to do something beautiful. I didn't reply to either. Instead, Brendan and I sat down with coffee and a blank notebook and systematically erased every decision they'd touched. Venue? Cancelled. Guest list? Starting from zero. Menu? We chose food we actually liked instead of the ostentatious spread Mom had demanded. It was draining, but with every line we crossed out, I felt the weight lifting, like I was finally breathing my own air again. Once they realized I wasn't bluffing, they escalated. They activated the extended family phone tree. Suddenly aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely spoke to were messaging me. Some confused, others livid. Mom had already spun the story. I'd cruelly banished my poor parents for no reason after they'd only tried to make my wedding extra special. A few relatives gently urged me to forgive because family is messy. Others straight up called me cold-hearted for breaking my parents' spirits weeks before the big day. I let them vent and kept moving forward silently. Then my parents tried to sabotage the cancellation. I'd already notified the original venue to release the date, but when I called to confirm, the coordinator sounded awkward. She said my mother had phoned an hour earlier insisting everything was still proceeding as planned. I informed her my parents had zero authority and to disregard any further contact from them. She apologized and processed the cancellation at once. Less than an hour later, Mom rang in a full meltdown. I picked up this time. She screamed that I was humiliating them by canceling their venue after she'd already bragged to everyone. She called me impossible, ungrateful, stubborn. I waited until she ran out of steam, then calmly reminded her she no longer had a vote. That's when she played her supposed ace. If I didn't restore everything exactly as she'd arranged, she and Dad simply wouldn't come. I almost laughed out loud. She was threatening me with what I'd already decided I wanted. I told her that was perfectly fine by me. Dead silence on the line like I'd punched her. Then instant backpedaling. She didn't mean it, she was just trying to make me see sense, etc. I repeated that if she'd ever put me before her fantasy, we wouldn't be here. Then I ended the call. Update 2 the following weeks. With my parents completely sidelined, Brendan and I built something that actually felt like us. Smaller, warmer. We chose a breathtaking garden setting nothing like the cavernous ballroom Mom had booked. The guest list became people who genuinely loved us, not obligatory cousins invited for optics. Word traveled fast that we'd cut my parents out entirely. A few relatives kept up the guilt campaign, but my real friends and Brendan's family backed us 100%. 3 weeks before the wedding, my parents made one final play. I came home to find a thick envelope slid under my door. No stamp, meaning they'd delivered it themselves. Inside was a long handwritten letter from Mom, overflowing with apologies and declarations of love, swearing the whole mess had spiraled out of control. She begged me to let bygones be bygones and allow them back in, promising total hands-off support and no more schemes. It was beautifully worded. Changed nothing. I'd already given them far more grace than they'd ever shown me. They'd spent weeks trashing my name to anyone who would listen. I dropped the letter straight into the trash without a reply. Update 3. One afternoon, an unknown number flashed on my screen with the text, "Hey, can we talk?" It's me. My heart stopped. After years of radio silence, now, weeks after everything blew up, she wanted to chat? I stared at the message, pulse racing. She'd ghosted all of us with zero explanation, leaving our parents wrecked and me utterly confused. Before I could decide how to respond, another text. "I heard what happened with Mom and Dad. I just want to explain." Explain. Now, convenient. I'd wondered for years why she vanished, why she let our parents unravel, why she never once checked on me. Part of me still needed answers, even if it hurt. So I typed one word. "Fine. Talk." She called instantly. The second I picked up, she launched into a trembling, tear-soaked monologue about how terrified she'd been to reach out. How?
Like, subscribe, and smash that bell before it smashes you. Stay with Reddit Tales Times for chilling twists, haunting tales, and daily doses of the disturbing. You've been warned.
Much she'd missed me. How awful she felt that I'd faced all this alone. I let her perform. She was skilled, perfect pauses, just enough sniffles. Then I cut in. I didn't want vague excuses. I wanted the real reason she disappeared. Long silence. Nervous laugh. "It's complicated." I told her to uncomplicate it fast. She mumbled something about feeling suffocated by our parents' expectations and needing space to find herself. Rage flared. I reminded her she didn't just take space. She erased us. She let them suffer for years. She let me suffer. Her tone flipped. Suddenly I was too young back then to understand. I'd always been the golden child while she carried the real pressure. I almost laughed in her face. Golden child? I told her she had been the sun they orbited while I was background noise. She scoffed, called me delusional. That's when I snapped. I laid it out. I'd grown up watching them idolize her and treat me like an afterthought. They hadn't cared about my wedding for its own sake, only as bait to lure her back. Silence again. I asked point blank if she'd known about their ambush plan, if she'd been part of it. Instant denial, too fast. I pushed. She swore she'd never do that to me, that she only reached out now because she genuinely wanted to fix things. I didn't buy a syllable. I told her if she wanted to fix anything, she could start with the whole truth, why she left and why she stayed gone. She muttered she had her reasons. I told her I no longer cared about her reasons. She'd made her choices, abandoned us, and now she didn't get to glide back in like nothing happened, especially not riding the chaos she'd helped create. More shaky breathing on her end. Finally, she whispered that she'd thought I'd at least be happy to hear from her. I hung up. I told her that once upon a time, yes, maybe I would have been overjoyed to hear her voice, but that was a lifetime ago. Now, nothing. I hung up. This time, I would be the one who vanished from their story. Update. It began with a quiet remark from Brendan while he was checking his phone. He muttered that someone had been flooding his inbox for the past hour. I assumed it was a colleague, But then he said my sister's name. My blood turned to ice. I asked how on earth she had his number. He exhaled heavily and said there was zero doubt my parents had handed it over. She had sent a barrage of messages, some dripping with remorse, others pretending everything was normal, and a few trying to play the sweet future sister-in-law angle. I asked him to let me see. He slid the phone across the table without hesitation. The first one was short and seemingly innocent. Hey Brendan, we've never really talked, but I'd love to speak with you. Then another, I just want to figure out what's really going on. I feel like there's been a huge misunderstanding. And another, I'm not trying to start drama. I miss my family so much and I hate that everything is falling apart right before the wedding. I rolled my eyes so hard it hurt. I kept scrolling. The messages grew longer, more theatrical. She painted herself as the poor, misunderstood soul who only wanted to mend broken bonds. She claimed she had vanished years ago because she was struggling mentally and needed space, and that I had completely misread her intentions. I asked Brendan if he had answered anything. He shook his head firmly. Then, right in front of me, he typed one line. Do not contact me again. Sent. Blocked. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A couple of days later, Brendan walked in from work looking irritated. Before I could even ask, he tossed his phone onto the counter and said my sister had actually called him. He'd picked up without checking the caller ID. He said she opened with fake brightness, like they were old friends just catching up before the big day. Brendan shut it down instantly, told her he had no interest in any rehearsed sob story. That's when she switched tactics and started begging. She whined that she only wanted to talk to me, that I was refusing to give her a fair chance, that she was trying to be the mature one by reaching out first. Brendan didn't let her finish a single sentence. He told her if she genuinely wanted to repair anything, she had years to do it instead of resurfacing the moment our parents needed a pawn. She turned defensive fast, insisting it wasn't fair that I was treating her like an outsider when we had once been so close, that she deserved a place in my life again. Brendan laughed in her ear. He told her she was the one who turned herself into a stranger, that she was the one who walked away from her family and left wreckage behind. Then he said the line that made me want to marry him all over again right there in the kitchen. You don't get to decide when my fiancé owes you forgiveness. That's not how this works. She lost it, snapped that he didn't know anything about our family and had no right to speak for me. He laughed again, louder. He told her that as the man who had held me while I cried over the hole she left, as the man about to vow his life to me, he had every damn right to protect me from her. She tried one last time, voice going soft and trembling like a wounded bird. Brendan wasn't buying the act for a second. He told her manipulation might work on our parents, but it wasn't going to work on him. Then he ended the call. The next morning a text from my mother arrived, outraged on my sister's behalf, claiming Brendan had destroyed her, that she had been sobbing for hours after the way he spoke to her. I didn't reply. I blocked the number. Brendan blocked my sisters. And just like that, every door slammed shut and locked. Update 5. I knew my mother wouldn't go down without one final performance. A few weeks before the wedding, Brendan's mom, my soon-to-be mother-in-law, rang me. She sounded more entertained than upset. She said my mother had tracked down her number and called, opening with fake warmth like the. She said Brendan would never need to turn his back on her because she had never lied to him, never manipulated him, never tried to hijack the most important day of his life for her own agenda. So if my mother was suddenly facing consequences, perhaps she should examine her own actions instead of blaming everyone else. Then she politely said goodbye and hung up. When Emil finished recounting the entire conversation, she simply asked if I was okay. I told her yes. For the first time in years, I actually meant it. Update 6. The wedding day arrived, and I felt nothing but calm, radiant happiness. The ceremony was small, heartfelt, surrounded only by people who loved us without conditions. Brendan's family welcomed me like I had always belonged. His mother never once mentioned the drama. She simply held my hands, looked me in the eyes, and told me I had never looked more beautiful. As I walked toward Brendan, I didn't spare a single thought for the people who weren't there. No ghosts, no regrets, no shadows. I saw only him, smiling like I was the only person in the universe. We said our vows in front of witnesses who were there for us, not for spectacle. When the officiant pronounced us married, the joy that rushed through me was clean and complete. Later that evening, one text slipped through from a new number. My mother. I hope you're happy. I still can't believe you let a wedding destroy our family. I read it once, deleted it, and turned off my phone. She was wrong. A wedding didn't destroy our family. Their choices did. And I was finally gloriously free.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss a twist. Stay tuned to Reddit Tales Times for your daily dose of drama, laughs, and unbelievable stories.